I didn't get Instagram until late in 2019. I never really had the urge. All my friends used Messenger, and I was fine sticking with that. When I learned how big a part social media can play in building a platform for a writer, though, I decided to set one up that was strictly a business account. It's always been my dream to become an author, so I had various accounts around for when I got something published. You know, promote book cover art, cover the writing process, where to buy the book, things like that. That's not exactly what happened, though. I mean, I'm still saving that account for what I wanted it to be, but then people in college started wanting to add me as a friend. At that point, I let them. It became sort of another messenger. However, I'd also used my real first and last name on this account, and a picture of myself as well, so people who wanted to look me up could easily find me. I learned that could be used for both good and bad purposes. I remember I was sitting in class one day when I got a message from somebody. I couldn't check my phone right at that moment. I waited until a brief break in the lesson so I could quietly slip off to the bathroom for a moment. As soon as I pulled up the screen, I saw I had received a photo with no text from a name I didn't recognize. When I opened it, I nearly dropped my phone in surprise. It was a picture of me sitting in class that very day. It had been taken from the doorway behind me. I could even see myself in the image, doodling in my notebook to focus. My back was hunched over my desk, but it was clearly me. My oversized sweater, my jeans, my hot chocolate, and my very obvious purple bag. I stood in front of the sink for a few minutes, trying to rack my brain as to who would do something like this. No one I knew was the pranking type, really. At least, not to this level. I also didn't think someone would randomly try to scare me like this without a good reason. I tried generally not to get in other people's business, so I couldn't really think of who it could possibly be. Class resumed not long later, so I decided to put it out of my mind and figure it out later. I asked my roommate, but they didn't know anything about it either. I believed him because he was barely going to his own classes, let alone stalking mine. Over the next few days, I continued to receive more messages from this unknown person. Always photos of me taken from a distance, sitting in class again, across the dining hall, once even in the downtown area near campus. At that point, I was really starting to freak out. I was considering going to the Public Safety Committee when the incidents just suddenly and abruptly stopped altogether. I still don't know who it was to this day. I know maybe this doesn't sound too scary compared to other stories you might have heard, but let me tell you this, having a stranger take photos of you and not being able to know who or why ever is quite harrowing. So, I'm sort of addicted to Snapchat. I'd send hundreds of snaps a day to my girlfriends, even if we were in the same room together. Anything to keep up a streak with somebody. I'd even accepted friends of friends, not people I explicitly knew myself, but not complete strangers either. I figured that was still staying within the bounds of safety. When my friends suggested we play a game they invented called Snapchat Scavenger Hunt, I was instantly in. They said the rules of the game involved sending a prompt to all your Snapchat followers, asking them to give you hints to a random place or object. Then you'd have to snap them a video or a photo to prove you'd found the right one. It sounded like a lot of fun. We made plans for a Saturday drive around to find everything we possibly could in a single day. I'd put some message out there like, "Hey, give us some objects to find, bitches," and that was that. We got a few requests actually. A red fire hydrant, a specific small business, a scenic pond. It was turning out better than expected, and these fabulous results urged the four of us to keep going. Then we got a private request from someone I didn't really know that well, a cousin of mine's boyfriend. It told us to find a remote property somewhere off Route 1. "Just look for the moose," he wrote. "You'll get a real neat surprise." We were instantly intrigued and promptly drove up and down Route 1 searching. My boyfriend didn't say which direction or even how far along to go, so we drove about as far as we were comfortable, scanning the roadsides for whatever moose he was talking about. Eventually, we had to ask for an additional clue, since we'd been at this for more than an hour. At this point, we were getting a little bit tired and wanted to find this surprise quickly. Cousin's boyfriend was very quick to respond, telling us that we'd see a remote dirt drive to the right, and then a wooden carved moose statue on the side of the road. The surprise would be right at the end of that drive. Well, sure enough, we did eventually discover a narrow dirt drive that turned sharply off the road and into a thick blanket of trees. One of my friends, the driver, was starting to get a bad feeling about this. None of our other targets had been in such remote areas like this, and to top it off, we didn't even have a clear idea what we were looking for. Off to the side, kind of nestled into the trees, we did see a large, sloppily carved wooden moose. That was kind of cool, I guess, but it looked unfinished, and with how much this guy was hyping it up, it better be a great surprise. After some debate, we went further down. Dead leaves and branches crunched under our tires as we went, and we slowed down for comfort. We tried to make some jokes to calm ourselves, but the further we went from the road, the more isolated it became, and the more unsettled we all felt. Suddenly, I got the strangest feeling. It just hit me all at once, like a punch to the gut that radiated through my entire body. I immediately thought to myself, "We need to get the fuck out of here." I'm not one to ignore my gut, especially if the feeling is this strong. I told my friends what I was thinking, and the one driving the car agreed this was too sketchy to be fun anymore. We made a plan to turn around at the end of the road, since it was too narrow to do so anywhere else. When we got to the end of that lonely drive, my friend immediately stopped the car. "Hey, there's someone out there!" Sure enough, laying in the middle of the small clearing at the very end was what looked to be a guy in a gray hoodie. He was face down, his arms and legs were sprawled out, and he looked to be either asleep or unconscious. That feeling twisted in the pit of my stomach. No matter what was going on here, we needed to go. One of my friends suggested we see if he was okay, but everyone else vetoed that. The driver inched carefully around the guy so as to not run him over, and turned around. We didn't waste any time speeding off. In the back window, I saw the guy immediately get up and look out after us. He didn't say anything, didn't try to catch up at all, he just stared as we left. And that's when I knew we were being led into some kind of trap. Whether it was to rob us, carjack us, or worse, I don't know. I texted my cousin, obviously angry, and asking her what the hell her boyfriend was trying to pull. It took a few minutes for her to get back to me, but her reply was shocking. Apparently, her boyfriend had lost his phone a couple of days ago and did not have it password protected, meaning that whoever had grabbed it had access to every one of his social media accounts, including his Snapchat. I guess when this person saw my shout-out, they thought they could set up some nefarious scheme to catch us unawares, and we wouldn't know what was happening until it was too late. The guy probably had more waiting for us in those woods. If one of us had gotten out to help him, it would have ended very, very badly, I imagine. Needless to say, I'm a lot more careful with who follows my Snapchat. I blocked the hacked account for my cousin's boyfriend and made sure it was absolutely him before I friended him again. Oh, and we never played Snapchat scavenger hunt again. When I was a kid/early teenager, I had a pretty hardcore werewolf/wolf phase. They were my favorite animal, and I searched for everything I could find about them or their supernatural cousins. Also, I have autism, so I don't know if that's relevant and maybe influenced my interests in any way. As you can imagine, I love the Balto movies, any and all nature documentaries featuring Arctic wolves, and just about every werewolf media I could find. Hell, I even gravitated towards the werewolves in Halloween specials, even when they weren't the main focus of the episode. A conversation I had with a friend recently really put it into perspective for me. I had a big werewolf phase. You get the point. As much as I was obsessed with this one specific thing though, I could never really find anyone I could talk about them with on my level. That's when my friend showed me Omegle, an online anonymous chat room that I could talk to anyone about anything on. We did this at a sleepover when the host's parents went to bed, which in hindsight was kind of a bad idea. We didn't really play it safe at all. Not that we cared at that time, being 13 and all. On the main screen, they had the Start Chat button, and the button to type in different categories. That way, if you wanted to chat with someone about a specific topic, users online would be filtered, and a potential match who might have typed something similar would come up. Of course, I tried typing in werewolves and hit chat. I remember the first chats being something uneventful, like F. I love werewolves. Cool. What's your favorite werewolf movie? Stranger has disconnected. That or people being very horny. I wasn't discouraged though. All my friends got bored and moved on to watching a movie. I sat on the floor next to them going through as many chats as possible, looking for someone I could really connect with. It was when they were all getting ready to go to bed that something promising came up. The person immediately started talking about some of the Discovery specials I'd seen, and seemed very enthusiastic as well. Pretty soon, we chatted non-stop for over an hour, going back and forth on our favorite tropes. Eventually, though, they asked what state I lived in. I didn't really know how I felt about this, because they were a stranger on the internet. But then I reasoned they liked werewolves and they hadn't been weird up to this point. Most importantly, they didn't know what I looked like, or even what part of my state I lived in. I thought it would be okay to tell them. I told them the state I occupied, and the floodgates opened immediately. Messages flooded the chat screen one right after the other, as if they couldn't contain themselves anymore. Where do you live in that state? Can I come visit you? We can dress up together for Halloween. Please tell me, where do you live? What's your name? What do you look like? I freaked out and closed Omegle after that. I felt overwhelmed and stressed out. I decided that had been a bad idea, and I should go to bed instead. I curled up into my sleeping bag, put my phone face down on the floor, and drifted off anxiously, if that's possible. I didn't mention what happened last night to any of my friends, mostly out of sheer embarrassment. I didn't say anything to my mom or dad either. They would kill me if they knew I was going on the internet to talk with strangers. I was also hesitant to go on Omegle again after, which probably is for the best. In hindsight, maybe the person was just overexcited like I was to talk with someone who really shared their interest. Looking back, with the switch from 0 to 100 to meet up though, I don't think that was the only reason. The whole incident didn't stop my obsession though. That Halloween, I went looking for the perfect costume. I was kind of hoping I'd meet someone else who loved them just as much as I did while trick-or-treating, in a less stressful, less weird sort of way. Eventually, I did find what I was looking for. It was a full werewolf costume with a brown furred mask and a jaw that moved when you talked, gloves made to look like clawed hands, and ripped torn clothing like the classic movies. Absolutely perfect for my purposes. My friends and I still love to go out trick-or-treating at that point, so we decided to go together. We lived in a pretty populated neighborhood at the time, which meant a lot of houses and a lot of good costumes. It also meant a lot of candy as well. I liked it for most of the night, but right as we were about to start heading home, I noticed another guy in a werewolf costume walking behind us. He was tall, gangly, and with a black wolf's head with these reflective, glassy eyes, kind of like a real wolf. I tried to get a better look through my mask's eye holes, but it wasn't working too good. All I could see was that this guy wasn't trying to catch up with us or get our attention specifically. He was just kind of meandering behind us with no clear intention. This time I mentioned it to my friends, who suggested we take the shorter way home. We ducked between two houses to head back to mine, but the man in the wolf mask didn't seem to mind our little detour. In fact, he really picked up the pace as we walked through the yard. One of my friends realized he was trying to cut us off on the other side and panicked, pulling me and our other friend along with her into somebody's private bushes. The leaves scratched at my arms, but the rubber mask kept my face safe at least. We hunkered down, not moving a muscle. I can't remember if I was even breathing. I peeked through a gap in the bush. The man in the mask came around the other side and paused, panting as if he were out of breath. It was surreal, as though I were in my very own horror movie. I was not enjoying this in the slightest. And that's when the wolf mask turned our way. Its glassy eyes reflected a sickly yellow from the streetlight. The way they seemed to pierce directly into me while still looking completely dead was the worst part. I didn't know how well the man could actually see out of this thing, given the trouble I was having with my own, but if he could see us at all, he didn't show it. Instead, the man simply turned away and walked off into the night. His shoulders shook, as if he were laughing, or possibly incredibly angry. My friends and I waited for what seemed like hours in that bush to make sure he was really gone. When we felt for sure that the coast was clear, we sprinted out and made our way back to my house. I found comfort in my mask, even as we careened through the dark streets. My parents were confused when we told them what happened, but told us to stay inside for the rest of the night. They seemed to think that it was an older kid playing a prank on us. Honestly, that's probably what I think too. Still though, my mind flashes back to that weird Omegle conversation I had a short time previously. Logically, I know there's probably no way it could be the same creepy person, barring a huge coincidence, but the idea of the person being weird to me online finding me out in the open is a chilling thought. So, this is a story from around 10 years ago. I was around 16 or 17 at the time. At the time this happened, I just kind of brushed it off, because nothing bad ended up happening to me. I put it down to, I guess shit just happens to you when you're a woman walking alone at night. Looking back now, though, I realized just how bad it really was. I was coming home on my own on a Thursday night, after being out at the pub with some friends. We had been out a little more centrally in the city, so I had to take a bus on my own to get home to my residential neighborhood. I had done this route hundreds of times, so I didn't see it as being particularly dangerous, especially as I live in a fairly nice neighborhood. It was only about 11 p.m., but because I lived in a residential area, and it was in the middle of the working week, when I stepped off the bus at my stop, it was absolutely dead, and there was no one around. Again though, this didn't really spook me, particularly as it was only about a 5 to 10 minute walk from the bus stop to my house. As I turned down a long residential street that led towards my place, I noticed a guy walking a little further down the street. It put me a little bit on edge, but I was reassured by the fact he had his back to me and was walking away from me down the street. As I kept walking down, I noticed the guy turn around and clock me though. That's fine, I thought. I always turn around myself when I hear someone walking around behind me at night for a while, so nothing weird about that. I noticed as we got further and further down the street though, he kept doing it, kept checking I was still walking in the same direction as him. At this point, I was getting a little freaked out, particularly because I was painfully aware that we were the only two people around. Just as I was weighing up what I should do, he turned down the path of one of the houses to our right, and I breathed a sigh of relief. Oh, so he was just going to his house. He was probably just as paranoid about me the whole time. The houses in my area are terraced, with the front doors being kind of embedded into an enclave at the front of the house. This means that from where I was standing about 50 feet away, I couldn't actually see that area as it was obscured by the wall. When I saw him walk down that path and disappear into the front door enclave, my logical conclusion was that he was letting himself into his house. I can't describe exactly what made me feel this, but after that initial feeling of relief wore off, I suddenly got this really bad gut feeling. I stopped walking and just stood there. There was this tiny voice in my head saying, "What if he's trying to fake you out?" That feeling became so strong that I stepped off the pavement and ducked down behind a parked car to wait there. After a couple of minutes of crouching behind the car and staring at the house, I saw movement and my heart stopped. The man came back down the path and stepped out into the street, looking around clearly for me. He must have been waiting for me in the doorway, knowing that if I kept walking, I wouldn't see him until it was too late. Unfortunately for him, his hiding place also meant he couldn't see me. So when I didn't walk past as he anticipated, he came back out into the street to try and work out where I'd gone. Looking back now, I probably should have called the police at this point, but as a scared teenager, my fight-or-flight brain took over. I sprinted down one of the roads running perpendicular to the street we were on, as I knew I could use it to take a slightly longer route home. I didn't stop running until I arrived, where I quickly double-locked the doors behind me. Amazingly, I didn't even think to wake anyone in my family up. I just went to bed and woke up the next morning and went to school. I dread to think what would have happened if I hadn't suddenly got that bad feeling and stopped walking. Part of me thinks that on some subconscious level, my brain must have registered not hearing the front door shut after the man had approached it, and therefore triggered an alarm in my head. I had no perception of this at the time, though. It's a lesson learned. Trust your gut. It's there for a reason. Let me preface this by saying I work in a well-populated town with a low crime rate, and no reason to outright assume any of these actions were what I later found out to be trafficking attempts. I work at a popular coffee chain, generally doing afternoon and closing shifts. This night in particular, we had a very young crew for closing, which happens at 10:30 p.m. For reference, our shift head was 19. We'll call her Sarah. There was myself, 17, my coworker 17, we'll call Mia, and another coworker 18, we'll call D. It had been a relatively slow night so far, with only a few loyal regulars dropping by. Both drive-thru and the cafe were empty. Heavy rainfall had started, and no one wanted to be out at this time. I was in the front of the store cleaning, while the rest of my coworkers were in the back. That was when an older man walked in. He wore odd clothing, a bit strange for the humid weather. Full black attire with combat boots, a heavy red jacket, and a beanie on his head obscuring his hair. I brushed it off as protection from the storm and figured he worked outside or something. I went to ask if he had placed an online order as he stood at the mobile counter. Putting on my best customer service voice, I smiled and went through the standard spiel. I was alarmed though when, instead of responding, he placed this bag on the counter and started pulling out DVDs. Once he'd finished pulling out a stack of 10 or so, he stared past me into the back room where my coworkers were obliviously chatting. He then made a lap around the store. He was eyeing me the entire time and not speaking a word. He backed out the front door and walked out to his truck, which I now saw was a large black pickup. Freaked out by his behavior, I stupidly grabbed the stack of DVDs and ran back to my coworkers. They were immediately alarmed by my demeanor and asked me what was wrong. I held the DVDs out and let them inspect them while I explained what happened. Much to my discomfort, Sarah pointed out that all the movies in the stack had synopsises about murders or kidnappings. Slightly pissed off and extremely uncomfortable, we made the decision to call my manager. He picked up and Sarah explained the situation. I comforted Dee and Mia, who were freaked out, probably even more so than me at the time. He told me there was nothing we could do about it but to call back if anything else happened. We hung up and moved back to the front of the store as a group. Things went about as usual from then on, but there was an air of fear about us. Mia stuck close to my side, and Dee stuck to Sarah's. The man's truck had pulled off at that point, but much to my dismay, he had pulled into the now-closed grocery store next door, sitting with a clear view through the drive-thru window. A few cars pulled through the drive-thru, and I even had a few customers ask if I was alright, due to my assumedly terrified face. I've always had a pretty good intuition about things, and this felt more wrong than anything else I had ever felt. As more time passed by, it was now time for Dee to leave. The man was still in the parking lot next door. We decided it would be best to call her boyfriend and have him come pick her up. This wasn't an irregular occurrence, and we didn't want this guy following her home. Mia then pointed out that a van had been sitting in the back of the parking lot for more than an hour at this point. We hadn't noticed this previously. Another gut feeling hit, and I made the decision to quickly lock the door. Daniel told her he was on the way, and I informed my manager that we closed the cafe for peace of mind. He said that was fine since business was slow anyway. Now, Sarah and Dee were in the back, and Mia and I were out front. I started cleaning the machines and trying to make idle chatter to keep her calm, which was no small feat, as she jumped every time she heard someone steaming milk even. As we were talking, I had my back turned to her when she suddenly screamed out mid-sentence, "Get out!" Alarmed, I whipped around to see where she was standing. She was standing near the counter close to the drive-thru window. I saw her pointing to a shadowy figure trying to climb in through the window. The next few moments were a blur of adrenaline, rushed thinking, and what I can only explain as extreme divine intervention. Grabbing her arm, I yanked Mia behind me and grabbed the hot bucket of sanitizer I had been using to scrub the counters around the machines. I threw the liquid all over the man's head, simultaneously hitting him in the head with the bucket and pushing him out the window. He only had his shoulders through so far. Now he had a big red bucket stuck on his head. At the same exact time, Daniel pulled up outside. Mia was now yelling for someone to call the police. I could see Dee in my peripherals running outside to Daniel. I slammed the drive-thru window shut and locked them. The man was laying on the ground, struggling to get his bearings. I couldn't tell you how much time had passed, although it couldn't have been more than 15 to 30 seconds. Daniel rushed over to the man who had now gotten to his knees. He kicked him in the back and pinned him on the ground. Sarah and Mia were pulling me to the back of the store, all of us fighting back sobs with Sarah on the phone with the police. Thankfully, some of our regulars happened to be deputies. They arrived within 5 minutes of our call and arrested the man. The aftermath was messy. They eventually pinned him as a member of a local trafficking ring that had been caught years prior and let out. Oh, yeah, and the van in the back that had kept Dee from leaving in the first place? It hightailed it out of the parking lot in the middle of all the action. It was eventually traced back to people who were also a part of the ring. Even though I won't be releasing names or such, as legal proceedings are still happening, I figured I would share my story. I still work there, and I'm very grateful for Daniel, who very well could have saved all our lives in that moment. He managed to keep the man pinned the entire time until the police arrived and disarmed him. The true hero of this story, although I do pride myself on quick thinking for getting him out of the store. Moral of the story, trust your gut feelings and always have a steaming hot bucket of something on hand. To preface this story, I'm a paramedic, and I have been for about 10 years. Working in emergency medicine, you get to see the weirdest and worst of people. It's not too uncommon for these types of stories to exist. However, in my 10 years, I have never experienced pure terror incarnate quite like on this night 6 years ago. I will not be revealing specific or identifying details as it pertains to privacy and HIPAA. It might be a bit long, but I hope it's worth a listen. About 6 years ago, I moved to another city for work. I worked for a 911 ambulance service that responded to calls in the city. We also responded to calls in the county and a few other smaller towns. The city itself was not a large city either, sub 100K people. Working for that service required working 24-hour shifts. It wasn't particularly busy though. Maybe you'd get 5 to 10 calls in 24 hours, and generally you'd get some decent sleep at night. The city was a pretty rough place, as the oil industry had boomed there, which drew all sorts of folk from around the country to work in the oil fields nearby. One night in January, me and my partner, who was an EMT basic, received a call in the next town over. It was about 2 a.m. when the call came out. The only information we had was that a person in an apartment had called 911 after hearing the downstairs neighbor screaming and begging for help. We responded emergent, as the details were very limited. When we arrived on scene, police and the fire department were already there, and we were getting ready to make entrance into the building with them. The person who called 911 was there and told us which apartment the screaming had come from. We attempted to pound on the door at first to get the resident to come to the door. When no one answered, the fire department got ready to spread the door and make entry. Luckily, the landlord showed up and gave us keys to get inside. As we opened the door, the creepiness started immediately. The apartment was pitch black, not a single light, as if no one was home. Police entered first, and with our flashlights we followed. We looked around the apartment, the kitchen, and the dining room. It looked like a hoarder's nest. I'm not exaggerating when I say there were literally 5 feet tall mountains of garbage, food, and dishes in the kitchen. Same in the living room, but with magazines and clothes. This meant there was only a very narrow walkway to navigate. Officers proceeded down the hallway ahead, where the bedroom and bathroom were. One of the officers stopped at the bathroom door, as there was light shining from underneath. He opened the door and just stood in the hallway. With a flat tone, he said, "She's in here." I walked first into the bathroom. The first thing I noticed was the peculiarity of the light in here. It was a very pale yellow light, coming from a single bulb on the ceiling. The light gave off an odd vibe to the scene. The next thing I noticed was the lack of anything in the bathroom. No floor mats, no toilet cover, no towels, no knickknacks, nothing. Completely empty, except the vanity which contained the sink. On top, in the bowl of the sink, were approximately 20 to 30 makeup bottles piled up. Some were open and leaking, causing there to be powders and liquids everywhere. The last thing I noticed, though, was the body of a woman lying naked in the tub. As I walked closer, I could see her laying on her side, nearly in the fetal position. Her skin was pale. There were about 8 inches of water in the tub. Looking at her face, her eyes were closed, her head was against the bottom, and her mouth and nose were completely submerged under the water. My partner stepped in behind me. He suggested we call the coroner and inform them of the body. 2 officers piled into the bathroom behind my partner. So now there were 4 of us in this tiny bathroom, with me next to the lady in the tub. Me being who I am, I decided to do my due diligence and at least make sure the lady was dead. I kneeled down next to the tub. I reached my arm in and put my fingers on her neck and attempted to check for a pulse. In an instant, without any warning or the slightest hint of movement, the woman sprung out of the tub with the agility and speed of a feral cat. The only reaction I was able to manage was to stand up as quick as possible. I stood there staring at her. She stared back at me, eyes wide as they could be, before she started screaming at me. She attempted to cover herself with her hands as best she could, while sitting in the water still. I quickly looked around and noticed that everyone else who was in the bathroom with me had bolted out of there, not a single soul in sight. I tried to steel myself and tried calming the woman down, telling her who I was and why I was there. She denied any screaming coming from her apartment and told me she did this every morning. She had some kind of joint condition, and soaking in warm water helped to ease her joint pain. At this point, though, I had serious doubts. I had to question this woman's sanity. I questioned her regarding self-harm and addressed that this could potentially be interpreted as suicidal behavior. She denied everything. The next step was to determine her mental capacity to ensure she was in the right frame of mind to make reasonable and appropriate decisions. She answered all my other questions appropriately, and at this point, per the law, she was able to refuse any and all care, as she was mentally sound. I asked her if she would at least allow me to check her vitals so I could be sure she was alright, and I could add it to my report. She vehemently refused and told me to get out right now. I acknowledged and had her sign a refusal of service form. As I left the bathroom, my partner, the 2 officers that were in there with me, and 2 other officers and the firefighters that had been waiting in the apartment were just staring at me with wide eyes and gaping mouths. I didn't say a word at all as we all left. Once we all got outside the complex, I had the most uneasy, uncontrolled fit of laughter. My partner and the officers started laughing too. I thought I might have shit myself. I wish I could say I never saw this lady again, but that wouldn't quite be true. That's an encounter for another time, though. I was eating in my car. It was late, almost midnight, and the dining room had already been closed up at McDonald's. The town I live in has a lot of poverty, so the occasional beggar isn't really a big deal. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a figure peeking in at my window, and I heard a knock as well. I instantly made sure my doors were locked, but cracked the window a bit to speak with her. She was obviously disheveled, layered up in coats, and toting a big purse in each hand. She calmly asked me if she could get a ride to the pharmacy. I told her that I was sorry. I was about to head home, and I couldn't spare the time. Immediately, she went into some crocodile tears. I looked over behind her as I was sitting there. There was a Walgreens literally a block down the street, and a CVS a block down from that. She told me she had gone to both, and they were already closed, then suggesting a specific street on which there was an open pharmacy. So, remember how I said I live here? Yeah, I knew that Walgreens was obviously never closed. I immediately rolled up my window and went back to finishing my burger. She started knocking and pounding on my window quite loudly. The good thing is, the bass in my car was turned all the way up, and the sound leaked a lot, so I just cranked up my music until she finally left. The creepiest part was I could still see her skulking around the parking lot looking at my car for a while. It was extremely weird. I could tell that everything she was telling me was a lie. This happened a couple of days ago, sometime around midday. I had just gotten home from getting my son his very first haircut. I'd laid him down for a nap in his crib and laid down in bed myself. And that was when I heard the front door handle suddenly rattle. I never lock my door during the day usually, but today I had a feeling and did. It's so strange. I don't even remember actually doing it though. It rattled a few more times. My window in my room is on a level with the head of my bed and faces the front porch. I peeked out and saw this super tall man kind of trying to peer in through my other windows. He then sat in the chair I had on my porch, literally right by the window my head was next to. I didn't hesitate to call the police because I don't own a firearm and my baby was in the home. I didn't want to risk being confrontational. After about 6 minutes on the phone with the dispatcher, whispering the details to her, a police officer arrived. The man tried to run, but they arrested him promptly. I was later told he had an active warrant for burglary. My dad and I were out fishing off the Florida Keys. We had our anchor out and had been fishing for about an hour or so. 15 minutes later, the boat sort of got bumped, and we rocked back and forth a bit. My dad joked, saying, "Looks like Jaws is after us. Better stay away from the edges." 10 seconds after him saying this, the boat began to move backwards. We were being towed away by our anchor line that was in the water. Whatever this was now dragging the boat backwards and slowly getting faster. Our boat was getting pulled under too. The next thing I heard was, "No fucking way." My dad dropped his pole and ran from the front to the back. He grabbed a knife and cut the anchor line. After that, we decided that fishing was not in the cards that day.